What if I told you that the most successful leadership strategy in human history wasn't created in a boardroom, but by a carpenter 2,000 years ago? A man who built the largest organization on Earth with zero funding, no technology, and just 12 followers. Today, his methods inspire billions and generate trillions in economic activity. Yet most CEOs completely miss his 3 core strategies that turned ordinary fishermen into world changers. These aren't religious principles. They're psychological weapons disguised as simple teachings. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Fortune 500 companies secretly study his playbook, and how you can use these same techniques to build unstoppable influence in your own field. If you're building an empire or leading teams, the most powerful influence methods in human history were hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. What took CEOs centuries to discover, one carpenter mastered instantly. Here's what most people don't understand about the carpenter from Nazareth. When Jesus started his movement, he faced an impossible challenge that would destroy any modern startup before it even began. Think about it. He had no credentials, no formal education, no political connections, and no funding. He was competing against the most established religious institution of his time, backed by centuries of tradition and enormous wealth. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of trying to outcompete the establishment on their terms, he did something that modern business gurus would call disruptive innovation. However, there was a deeper psychological strategy at play that most leadership experts completely miss. Every successful CEO knows that the hardest part isn't getting people to follow you, it's getting them to believe in something bigger than themselves. Steve Jobs didn't sell computers. He sold the vision of changing the world. Elon Musk doesn't sell cars. He sells the future of humanity. But here's the mystery. How do you create that level of belief when you have nothing to show for it? Jesus faced this exact challenge. He couldn't point to previous successes, impressive headquarters, or testimonials from satisfied customers. Yet within 3 years, he had created such intense loyalty that his followers were willing to die for the cause. Even after his death, instead of the movement collapsing like most startups do when they lose their founder, it exploded across the known world. The conventional wisdom says this happened because of divine intervention. But if we strip away the religious interpretation and analyze this purely as a case study in influence and persuasion, we discover something far more practical and applicable to modern leadership. The carpenter had cracked a code that took psychologists 2,000 years to understand, and it's hiding in plain sight in every interaction he had with people. Most leaders make the fatal mistake of trying to build authority through external validation, impressive titles, fancy offices, or past achievements. But Jesus did the opposite. He built authority through a psychological principle that modern neuroscience now proves is hardwired into human behavior. The secret lies in what psychologists now call transformational leadership, but Jesus didn't just practice it, he perfected it. Here's what really happened. Instead of positioning himself as superior to his followers, he made them the heroes of their own stories. This is pure psychological genius, and here's why it's so powerful. When most leaders try to inspire people, they make themselves the center of attention. Look at what I've accomplished, follow me to success. But Jesus flipped this completely. He looked at a tax collector named Matthew, the most hated profession of his time, equivalent to a corrupt Wall Street executive today, and said, "You will do greater things than these." He took fishermen who barely made ends meet and told them they would catch men instead of fish, transforming their mundane skill into a world-changing mission. This wasn't just positive thinking. This was strategic psychological programming. Modern research shows that when people believe they're capable of greatness, their performance actually improves. It's called the Pygmalion effect, and Jesus weaponized it 2,000 years before psychologists gave it a name. But here's where it gets even more sophisticated. Jesus didn't just give people bigger visions of themselves, he gave them a role in a larger narrative that made their lives meaningful. Peter wasn't just a fisherman anymore. He was the rock upon which a movement would be built. John wasn't just a young man with a temper. He was the beloved disciple who would carry forward the most important message in history. The psychological principle here is profound. People don't just follow leaders who promise them success. They follow leaders who give their lives meaning. This is why startup employees will work 80-hour weeks for equity that might never pay off. It's not about the money. It's about being part of something that matters. Jesus took this one step further. He didn't just give people meaning in the present. He gave them a vision of legacy. What you do here will echo in eternity, he essentially told them. This created what psychologists call future self-continuity, the belief that their current actions were connected to their future identity. Modern CEOs spend millions on consultants to figure out how to create this kind of employee engagement. Jesus did it with 12 men and no budget. He understood something that most leaders still don't. Authority isn't taken, it's given. And people give authority to those who make them feel powerful, not powerless. The result? His followers didn't just work for him, they became extensions of him. When he wasn't in the room, they still carried out the mission with the same passion as if he were standing right there. This is the holy grail of leadership, creating a culture that sustains itself without your constant supervision. Let me break this down with an analogy that will make this crystal clear. Imagine leadership as a theater production. Most leaders cast themselves as the star of the show, expecting everyone else to play supporting roles. They stand center stage, demanding applause and attention. But Jesus did something completely different. He became the director. A great director doesn't perform on stage. Instead, they bring out the best performance in every actor. They take someone who sees themselves as just another face in the crowd and help them discover they're actually the hero of the story. Under a great director, a nervous understudy becomes a confident lead because the director sees potential that the actor didn't even know they had. This is exactly what Jesus did. He looked at Simon, an impulsive fisherman, and saw Peter, the rock-solid leader. He looked at Saul, a persecutor of his movement, and saw Paul, the greatest missionary in history. He didn't just recruit followers, he created leaders by showing them a version of themselves they never imagined possible. The psychological magic happens because of how our brains are wired. When someone we respect tells us we're capable of something great, our brain literally rewires itself to make that vision reality. It's called neuroplasticity, and it's why the best coaches, teachers, and leaders all use the same technique. They make us believe in our own potential before we do. But here's the crucial part most leaders miss. This only works if it's authentic. You can't fake this kind of belief in people. Jesus genuinely saw the potential in everyone he met, even when they couldn't see it themselves. This wasn't manipulation, it was recognition. He understood that every person carries seeds of greatness. They just need someone to water those seeds with belief and opportunity. Modern leadership often focuses on fixing people's weaknesses. Jesus focused on amplifying their strengths. He took what people were already good at and showed them how to use those skills to change the world. This is why his influence lasted. He didn't create dependence on his leadership. He created independence through their own empowered potential. Character count, 2,498. If this is exploding your mind, stop now and hit that subscribe button. Why? Because what comes next will blow your perception about influence and persuasion, and if you don't subscribe, the algorithm will hide my next secrets from you. Now here's where the Carpenter's strategy gets even more sophisticated, and it reveals a leadership principle that most modern executives completely misunderstand. Jesus had mastered something that would make him unstoppable in today's business world. He knew how to turn resistance into recruitment. Every leader faces opposition, but most handle it in exactly the wrong way. When someone challenges their authority, they either fight back aggressively or try to appease the critic. Both approaches actually weaken their position. Fighting back makes you look defensive and insecure. Appeasing makes you look weak and unprincipled, but Jesus did neither. When the Pharisees, the religious establishment, tried to trap him with impossible questions, he didn't defend himself or back down. Instead, he did something that modern negotiation experts would call verbal aikido. He redirected their attack back at them in a way that exposed their own hypocrisy while making his point even stronger. Here's what's fascinating. Every time someone tried to tear him down, he somehow came out looking more credible, not less. This wasn't luck or divine intervention. This was psychological mastery. He understood something about human nature that took social psychologists decades to discover. Public conflict, when handled correctly, actually increases your authority rather than diminishing it. Think about it this way. When someone publicly challenges you and you respond with wisdom and composure, everyone watching makes a subconscious judgment about your character. If you stay calm while your opponent gets emotional, if you respond with facts while they respond with insults, if you show strength while they show weakness, the audience instinctively sides with you. But Jesus took this even further. He didn't just win these confrontations. He used them as teaching moments that demonstrated his principles in real time. When someone brought him a woman caught in adultery, trying to force him into an impossible choice between mercy and justice, he turned it into a lesson about forgiveness that people still quote 2,000 years later. This reveals something crucial about his approach to leadership. He never saw opposition as a threat to be eliminated. He saw it as an opportunity to clarify his message and demonstrate his values. Every attack became a platform to reach more people with greater impact. Modern CEOs spend fortunes on crisis management consultants when they face public criticism. Jesus showed how to turn every crisis into a recruitment opportunity. The secret behind this supernatural ability lies in a psychological principle called cognitive dissonance resolution. But Jesus applied it with surgical precision. Here's how it works. When people see someone remain calm and composed under attack, while their attackers become emotional and irrational, their brains automatically resolve the dissonance by elevating the calm person's status and credibility. But Jesus didn't just stay calm, he did something even more powerful. He responded to personal attacks by addressing the deeper issues that the attacks revealed. When religious leaders accused him of breaking their laws, he didn't defend the specific action. Instead, he questioned the entire system that prioritized rules over people. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. This is strategic genius. By elevating the conversation from personal defense to philosophical principle, he positioned himself as the voice of reason against an unreasonable system. Every time they tried to make it about him, he made it about the bigger picture. This is what great leaders do. They use opposition as a spotlight to illuminate their vision. The psychological effect is devastating to opponents and inspiring to observers. When someone attacks you personally and you respond by addressing systemic issues, you implicitly communicate that you're operating on a higher level. You're not just defending yourself, you're defending principles that benefit everyone. Jesus mastered another crucial element. He never attacked the person, only the position. When he called out hypocrisy, he targeted the behavior, not the individual. This is psychologically brilliant because it leaves room for redemption. The person being criticized can separate their identity from their actions, which makes them more likely to change rather than double down on their mistakes. This approach also protects your reputation with observers. When people see you attack ideas rather than individuals, they perceive you as principled rather than petty. They start to trust your judgment because you're clearly not motivated by personal vendetta. You're motivated by something larger than yourself. But here's the most sophisticated part. Jesus used these confrontations to demonstrate the very principles he was teaching. When he talked about forgiveness, he showed it by forgiving his attackers. When he taught about love, he showed love even to those trying to destroy him. This created what psychologists call behavioral consistency. His actions perfectly matched his words, which is the foundation of authentic leadership. Modern leaders often separate their public positions from their personal behavior, thinking people won't notice the contradiction. But people always notice, and once they detect inconsistency, they stop trusting everything you say. Jesus understood that leadership isn't about perfect words, it's about consistent character under pressure. Picture this. Leadership is a martial arts match. Most leaders, when attacked, either hit back harder or try to run away. Both responses give power to the attacker, but Jesus mastered what martial artists call using your opponent's force against them. When someone pushed, he didn't push back. He stepped aside and let their momentum carry them past him. Imagine a chess grandmaster playing against an amateur. The amateur makes aggressive moves, trying to capture pieces quickly, but the grandmaster doesn't panic or match their aggression. Instead, they use each attack as an opportunity to improve their position. Every move the amateur makes actually strengthens the grandmaster's strategy. By the end of the game, the amateur realizes they've been outplayed not by force, but by wisdom. This is exactly how Jesus handled opposition. When religious leaders tried to trap him with the question about paying taxes to Caesar, he didn't get defensive about his political position. Instead, he asked for a coin and said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." With one sentence, he neutralized their trap and elevated the entire discussion to a higher philosophical level. The psychological principle here is called reframing. Instead of accepting the opponent's framing of the conflict, Jesus consistently reframed every attack as an opportunity to teach something deeper. This made him look wise rather than defensive, and it transformed potential defeats into teaching moments that strengthened his influence. But here's what makes this strategy so powerful. It's completely authentic. Jesus wasn't manipulating these situations for tactical advantage. He genuinely believed that every moment, including moments of conflict, could become opportunities for growth and understanding. This authenticity is what made his approach so effective. Most leaders fail at this because they're trying to win arguments rather than win people. Jesus understood that winning arguments often means losing relationships. So instead of trying to prove he was right, he created space for others to discover truth for themselves. This approach turns former opponents into future allies, because people don't resent you when they feel like they arrived at the conclusion on their own. The result? Every public confrontation actually expanded his influence rather than limiting it. People saw how he handled pressure and thought, "This is someone I want to follow." If you're watching this far, you are different from most people. Prove it. Hit that like button now and subscribe, because people like you deserve to know all the secrets I'll reveal in upcoming videos. But now we come to the most profound leadership secret of all, one that reveals why Jesus' influence didn't just survive his death, but actually multiplied exponentially afterward. This is the mystery that has puzzled leadership experts for centuries. How do you create a legacy that becomes stronger in your absence than it was during your presence? Most leaders face what I call the founder's dilemma. They build organizations that depend entirely on their personal involvement. When they step back or pass away, everything they built starts to crumble. We see this constantly in business. Charismatic CEOs retire and their companies lose direction. Political leaders leave office and their movements fragment. Even successful entrepreneurs often watch their ventures fail after they exit. But Jesus did the impossible. His movement not only survived his death, it exploded across the known world with unprecedented speed and impact. Within 300 years, it had transformed the Roman Empire. Within 2,000 years, it had become the largest belief system in human history. How do you create that kind of sustainable influence? The conventional explanation focuses on religious factors. But there's a deeper psychological principle at work here that any leader can study and apply. Jesus didn't just build a following, he built a system that could reproduce his leadership approach in others. This is the ultimate achievement in organizational psychology, creating leaders who create leaders who create leaders. Here's what most people miss. In his final months, Jesus fundamentally changed his leadership strategy. Up until that point, he had been the primary teacher, the decision maker, the face of the movement. People came to hear him speak, witness his actions, and receive his guidance. But then he did something that seemed counterintuitive. He started preparing to remove himself from the equation. Instead of making himself more indispensable, he began making his followers more independent. He sent them out to spread the message without his supervision. He gave them authority to make decisions in his name. He taught them not just what to think, but how to think. This wasn't just delegation. This was systematic leadership development on a massive scale. Most leaders can't do this because their ego is too tied up in being needed. They enjoy the dependency that others have on them. It makes them feel important and irreplaceable. But Jesus understood something profound. True leadership isn't about being irreplaceable. It's about making everyone around you more capable than they were before they met you. The psychological genius behind this approach lies in what modern organizational theory calls distributed leadership. But Jesus implemented it with a sophistication that most companies still struggle to achieve today. He didn't just teach principles, he embedded his thinking process into his followers' minds so deeply that they could apply his approach to situations he never directly addressed. Think about this strategically. Jesus knew he had limited time to establish a movement that would need to function without him. So instead of trying to create detailed rules for every possible situation, he focused on developing his followers' judgment and character. He taught them how to think like leaders, not just how to follow a leader. This is why his followers could later navigate completely new challenges, like spreading their message to non-Jewish populations without compromising the core principles. They had internalized his decision-making process, not just his specific decisions. This is the difference between teaching someone to fish and giving them a fish taken to its ultimate level. But here's where it gets even more sophisticated. Jesus created what psychologists now call psychological ownership of the mission in each of his followers. They didn't see themselves as employees carrying out someone else's vision. They saw themselves as co-creators of a shared vision. This is why they were willing to die for the cause even after he was gone. It wasn't his cause anymore. It was their cause too. The mechanism he used is brilliant. He consistently asked them questions instead of just giving them answers. Who do you say that I am? What do you think this means? How would you handle this situation? By making them think through problems themselves. With his guidance, he was actually training them to solve future problems without his guidance. Modern leadership development programs spend years trying to achieve what Jesus accomplished in 3. Creating autonomous leaders who maintain alignment with core principles while adapting to new challenges. He did this through a process that psychologists call scaffolded learning, gradually removing support as competence increases. But the most powerful element was how he modeled the very leadership principles he wanted them to embody. They didn't just learn about servant leadership, they watched him wash their feet. They didn't just hear about forgiveness, they saw him forgive those who betrayed him. They didn't just understand sacrifice, they witnessed him give up everything for others. This created what neuroscientists call mirror neuron activation. Their brains literally rewired themselves to replicate the patterns they observed in him. This is why his leadership style could be transmitted with such fidelity across generations and cultures. It wasn't just intellectual knowledge. It was deeply embedded behavioral programming. Imagine leadership as planting a forest. Most leaders plant a single magnificent tree themselves and expect everything else to grow in their shadow. But trees that grow in shadows remain small and weak. When the big tree falls, the entire forest dies because nothing else was strong enough to survive on its own. But Jesus planted his leadership like a master forester. Instead of creating one dominant tree, he planted multiple strong trees, each capable of creating their own forest. He understood that a diverse, interconnected ecosystem is far more resilient than any single organism, no matter how impressive. This is why his influence multiplied rather than diminished after his death. Each of his followers became like a seed that could plant an entire new forest. Peter established the church in Rome. Paul spread the message throughout the Mediterranean. John preserved the teachings for future generations. Each one became a force of nature in their own right. But they all grew from the same root system of principles and character. The psychological principle here is profound. Sustainable influence comes from empowering others to exceed your own impact, not from making them dependent on your continued presence. This requires a fundamental shift in how leaders think about success. Instead of measuring success by how much people need you, you measure it by how much they can accomplish without you. Most leaders fail at this because they confuse control with influence. They think that if people can function without them, it means they weren't that important. But Jesus understood the opposite truth. The more capable you make others, the more your influence multiplies through them. Your impact becomes exponential rather than linear. This is the ultimate leadership paradox. The more you give away your power, the more powerful you become. The more you develop others, the more your own legacy grows. The more you prepare people to succeed without you, the more immortal your influence becomes. Jesus didn't just create followers who remembered him. He created leaders who became him, in the sense that they embodied his principles and extended his impact far beyond what he could have achieved alone. This is how you build something that lasts not just years or decades, but centuries and millennia. These three secrets: empowering others to see their own greatness, transforming opposition into opportunity, and building leaders who can lead without you, reveal why a carpenter from 2,000 years ago still influences billions today. His methods weren't religious. They were psychological masterpieces. He understood that true power comes not from being irreplaceable, but from making everyone around you more capable. In a world of leaders who demand followers, he created followers who became leaders. That's not just influence, that's immortality through human potential. The question isn't whether these principles work. History proves they do. The question is, will you have the courage to apply them? If these secrets exploded your mind, you need to see my next videos, but only if you hit that bell. Otherwise, you'll miss the most powerful secrets in history. What's your opinion on the ideas presented in this content? Leave it in the comments. Send this discovery to that friend of yours who has sharp perception. This analysis is speculative and interpretative, based on historical accounts and leadership principles. It is not intended as religious doctrine or clinical psychological assessment, but rather as an examination of documented leadership techniques and their potential applications in modern contexts.